The Veth gave humanity the resonance drive on a Tuesday, which, looking back, was the universe's way of telling us it had a sense of humor. I was the quartermaster assigned to receive the technology transfer. My name is Kowalski. And if you asked my commanding officer to describe me in one word, she would probably say, problem, which is unfair, because I have solved significantly more problems than I've created. The ratio is favorable. Mostly. The ceremony was held aboard the Veth orbital station Sayan Karath, which was the most beautiful place I'd ever been and smelled exactly like a library that had been sealed for 40 years and then opened into a room where someone was boiling copper. The Veth had translated the station's aesthetic briefing for us. Every surface was precision intentional, which I understood to mean don't touch anything, which I filed under noted. Architect Sayan Voss presided over the transfer. She was tall, the way a cathedral is tall not just in height but in intention, and her 4 upper limbs were folded in what the cultural attaché had told us meant formal welcome. Her eyes, which were compound and amber and slightly unnerving, tracked our delegation with the careful attention of someone cataloging species for future reference. The resonance drive, Sayan Voss said, in the precise, slightly musical galactic common she'd clearly rehearsed, represents 1,200 years of Veth scientific development. It is our gift to humanity. We offer it in the spirit of interstellar cooperation and mutual elevation. She presented the core, a crystalline thing about the size of a shoebox, glowing faintly gold at its center on a plinth that was almost certainly more expensive than my entire ship. We have prepared the operational covenant, she continued, and her secondary assistant produced a document that was, I counted quickly, 47 pages long. It outlines the terms of use, the prohibited modifications, the approved maintenance protocols, and the 17 categories of interaction that the Veth Science Directorate has determined are contraindicated for non-Veth species. I accepted the core with both hands and said, "This is an incredible honor," which was true. I accepted the covenant with my left hand and said, "We will study this thoroughly," which was also true. Technically, because I did study page 1, on the walk back to our quarters. Page 1 said, essentially, do not disassemble. I set the core on the mess hall table, because our quarters were cramped and the lighting was better in the mess, and because engineer Priya Nath was already there with her coffee and her notebook, and Priya had a gift for looking at things and immediately seeing how they could be improved. "That's it?" she said, leaning forward. "That's it." She pulled out her notebook. "The refraction pattern on the left face is irregular. See that?" She pointed. "The energy distribution should be symmetric. If you adjusted the lattice spacing at the emission point, 17.1, Priya, I'm just saying, we've had it for 11 minutes. And in 11 minutes, I've already identified 3 inefficiencies." She said it the way other people say good morning casually, like it was just a fact about the universe she was noting for completeness. From the observation window across the corridor, architect Sayan Voss was watching. I found this out later. At the time, I didn't know she was there, so I couldn't see her 4 upper limbs go very, very still. The Veth had expected humanity to spend decades studying the drive before attempting to interact with it. They had factored this into their timeline. They had, their records later showed, never once considered the possibility that we would have the thing halfway disassembled before dinner. I want to be clear. I did not authorize the disassembly. I did not stop it, either. In my defense, Priya had already identified a 4th inefficiency by then, and she had that look she gets, the one that means the next 6 hours of her life have already been allocated. And stopping Priya in that state is like trying to stop a river by asking it nicely. At 2,200 hours, she had the core's outer lattice removed, the internal resonance chamber exposed, and 3 of its 17 contraindicated interaction categories thoroughly investigated. She was taking notes in a handwriting so small it looked like the page was developing a rash. "We should probably tell Sayan Voss," I said. After, Priya said. I did not ask after what. The Covenant had, I later counted, 61 rules. We broke the first one inside of 6 hours. We were working on number 7 by morning. To be fair, Rule 7 was, do not attempt to interface the drive core with non-Veth power conduits. And we hadn't exactly attempted it. Priya had been running theoretical models of the resonance frequency against our station's power grid specs. Purely hypothetical, she said. She was just curious. Just seeing numbers, not doing anything, and then she'd needed to verify one variable empirically. Just one. Just a quick check. And the check had involved a connector cable and a power port, and about 4 seconds of what she described afterward as controlled experimental contact. The lights across 3 decks strobed in a pattern I didn't recognize. The Veth recognized it immediately. I know this because the emergency comm channel lit up 7 seconds later, which, for a species that operates on collective consensus, is a response time that suggests they were already watching us. Quartermaster Kowalski. Architect Sen Voss's voice on the comm was extremely calm, the way very deep water is calm. Are you well? 20. 24. 24. Are you well? 24. 24. 24. Completely, I said. Minor technical event. Fully under control. The frequency pattern your power grid is currently broadcasting, she said, is the Veth emergency distress signal for hull breach and catastrophic atmosphere loss. A pause while I absorbed this. We are not experiencing hull breach, I said. I understand. Nevertheless, the response team arrived in 8 minutes, which on a Veth station meant they had essentially teleported, because Veth don't hurry. Hurrying, we'd been told, implied that the original plan was inadequate. Veth plans are not inadequate. The fact that they hurried told me something about how they felt about what Priya had accidentally done to their station's emergency frequency band. There were 7 of them, all in the same formal, folded limb configuration. All looking at our mess hall, for Pasabar, where the resonance drive sat open on the table next to Priya's coffee mug and her notes and a small diagram she'd sketched of how the lattice could be restructured for 30% greater efficiency. The lead engineer, his name translated, I was told, to something like 4th precision of the Sehan Karath Technical Directorate, which I mentally shortened to 4, looked at the disassembled drive, and then looked at me with the amber compound eyes and the tapper. Particular stillness that I was starting to recognize as the Veth equivalent of speechless. You have opened it, he said. Priya opened it, I said, because I believe in accuracy. The Covenant specifically prohibits. Page 1. Yes. We know. Sen Voss arrived behind her team and surveyed the scene. Her secondary eyes, the smaller pair, lower on her face, which the cultural briefing said were primarily for close-range detail work, focused on Priya's notebook. What are these? She asked. Improvement sketches, Priya said, without looking up. The lattice spacing at the emission point creates a 17% energy loss in the conversion phase. If you reorient the secondary crystal array by about 12 degrees. The lattice spacing, Fore said, with the precision of someone who has devoted their entire life to a subject and is now watching a stranger spill coffee on it, is the result of 400 years of iterative refinement. 400 years and still 17% loss, Priya said pleasantly. I'm just noting. The silence that followed was the kind that has mass and texture. I stepped in, because that is what quartermasters do when engineers have broken something that is not technically theirs to break. We apologize for the distress signal. That was unintended. We were curious about the resonance frequency interaction with our power grid, and we got ahead of ourselves. Curious, Sen Voss repeated. Yes, you were curious, she said. So you connected our core to your power grid. To see what would happen. She looked at me for a long moment. What did you think would happen? We didn't think, I said. That's sort of the thing. We wanted to find out. Another silence. Four's upper limbs shifted in a way that, I was pretty sure, meant something like horror. Voss's expression alien enough that I couldn't read it directly, but legible in the way that certain emotional states transcend biology was harder to name. She was looking at me the way you look at something that doesn't fit your existing categories and that you're not sure whether to be afraid of or fascinated by. We would like to keep the resonance frequency we accidentally found, Priya said. The 4.7 kilohertz band. It's not in the covenant. Voss needed a moment. I gave her several. Here's the thing about giving humans a tool. We will use it for something you never imagined, and it will probably save your life, and you will hate us for it. The Veth station Sayan Karath was, as I mentioned, beautiful and ancient. And its energy core was the ancient part, more than the beautiful part. 800 years old. Maintained with Veth precision, which meant it had been tended with absolute adherence to the original specifications and zero deviation from approved maintenance protocol, and had therefore accumulated, over 8 centuries, a set of microstresses in its containment lattice that their models had flagged as low-probability critical meaning in Veth scientific language. That catastrophic failure was unlikely in any given decade, but statistically inevitable on a long enough timeline. The timeline, as it turned out, was today. I was in the middle of explaining to Four, with the assistance of a translator and a great deal of goodwill on both sides, that Priya's lattice reorientation sketch was a genuine suggestion and not an insult to 4 centuries of Veth engineering, when the station's alert system did something I hadn't heard before. Not a drill tone, not a standard alert. Something lower and more serious. A sound like the station itself clearing its throat before saying something bad. "What is that?" I said. Four's secondary eyes went to the ceiling and then back to me, and his composure, which had been considerable even while discussing the disassembly of his species' most advanced technology, did something I hadn't seen Veth composure do before. It cracked. "Energy core cascade," he said. "Primary containment lattice failure. I've been in emergencies before. The particular quality of this one, the way Four said it, flat and quiet, the way Voss went completely still on the other side of the room told me everything I needed to know about the probability calculations they were running and what the numbers were coming back as. "How long?" I said. 14 minutes before secondary containment is compromised. And then, Four said, we begin evacuation of the station. Priya was already on her feet. She wasn't looking at Four, or at the ceiling, or at the door. She was looking at the resonance drive core, which was still on the table, still partially disassembled, still glowing faintly gold at its center. "What frequency is the containment lattice running at?" she said. Four told her. I didn't catch the number. Priya did, I could tell by the way her pencil was moving. "The 4.7 kilohertz band," she said, mostly to herself. "Modified for amplitude." She was already reassembling the drive, with the speed of someone who has taken a thing apart enough times to know how all the pieces go back. If we boost the emission and tune it to the lattice frequency, we can use the resonance to stabilize the microstress fractures. Basically, we vibrate the thing in the exact right way to hold it together. Silence. "That is," Four said, "not a methodology that exists." "It does now," Priya said. "The resonance frequency you found was accidental. Most good things are. We have not modeled this approach." "I know," Priya said. "We don't have time to model it." Four looked at Voss. Voss was looking at Priya the way I'd seen her look at us from across the observation corridor the night before, when we'd had the core on the table and she'd gone very still. That same expression I hadn't been able to name. I had a name for it now. It was the expression of someone watching something that doesn't fit their model of how intelligent creatures are supposed to behave, and being unable to look away. "The probability of success for an unmodeled intervention," Four began, "is better than 0, I said. "Which is what we've got otherwise." He looked at me. "We're not going to run the numbers," I said. "We never run the numbers. That drives you crazy," I understand. But right now, today, that might be the only thing that helps. 9 minutes left. Scifi said. Priya worked. She did not ask for quiet. She talked to herself continuously. A low-running commentary that I'd heard 100 times in 100 maintenance bays. The verbal processing of someone thinking faster than she could organize. If the amplitude is here, then the harmonic should be there. But the lattice spacing, wait. No, she's reoriented, so okay. Okay. If I push the emission point to the secondary crystal. She swore. Once, impressively, in 3 languages. She made a correction. She swore again, more softly, which in my experience means the correction worked. The Veth engineers stood back and watched in silence. I watched them, watching her. 4's upper limbs had gone through 3 distinct positions in 5 minutes, formal, uncertain, something I didn't have a name for. Scifi hadn't moved at all. Priya picked up the drive core covered in her fingerprints, stickered on one face with a label that said, Property of Kalski in block letters. Because we'd labeled everything at the start of the transfer, and I'd thought it was funny at the time and walked to the energy core housing at the center of the room. She found the interface port by touch. She plugged it in and started talking to herself again. The station's alert tone changed pitch. Not gone, still present. Still serious, but different. Lower. Like something that had been building pressure, finding a slow release. 3 minutes later, it stopped. The lights steadied. The silence on the station was a different kind of silence than the emergency kind. It was the silence of a building that had been holding its breath and had just, quietly, let it go. Priya sat down on the floor of the Veth station, the beautiful, precision-intentional, probably extremely expensive floor, and reached into her jacket pocket and produced a protein bar. The dense, unpleasant kind that came in the field ration packs. And she unwrapped it and she ate it. The Veth engineers looked at each other. Scifi walked over and stood in front of Priya and looked down at her for a long moment. Did you know it would work? She asked. Priya looked up. She thought about it with the honesty of someone who doesn't see the point of softening the answer. No, she said. Scifi was quiet. Then she said, When you did not know it would work, what made you try? Priya considered this the way she considered engineering problems, from the outside in, looking for the load-bearing part. Seemed worth finding out, she said. I watched Scifi process that. I watched her 4 upper limbs settle into a configuration I hadn't seen before, something between formal and something else. Something that might have been, in a creature with different biology and a different 1,200 years of history, the posture of someone standing at the edge of a very large new idea. Later, weeks later, when the incident reports were filed and the cross-species diplomatic review was concluded, and Priya had been officially commended and unofficially told never to disassemble transferred technology again, I got a copy of Line, Ein, Scifi's formal assessment of the Saiyan Karath event. Most of it was technical. Most of it was about the resonance frequency and the lattice stabilization and the modifications Priya had made to the drive core and what they meant for Veth understanding of their own technology. The last line was not technical. It read, Humans do not calculate acceptable outcomes. They manufacture them. I filed that next to Priya's property of Kowalski sticker, which I had peeled off the drive core before we returned it and kept. Because I am a quartermaster and quartermasters keep records of everything. Scifi found me at the docking bay when we were preparing to leave. She stood there in her full height with her formal limbs and her amber eyes, and she said, without preamble, Does it keep you up at night? I didn't have to ask what she meant. Not really, I said. Maybe 20 minutes. Then I fall asleep fine. She looked at me for a long moment. That, she said, is the part that keeps me up at night. And I thought about 1,200 years of careful, patient, precise Veth science. And I thought about Priya sitting on an expensive floor, eating a protein bar, and I thought that we were probably going to be very good for each other, humanity and the Veth. And also, probably a tremendous amount of trouble. Mostly, I thought, 20 minutes is generous. It was probably closer to 10.